Yeah, I think it's really through automation and through efficiency. Component costs are really not that much different if you buy something here or source it in China. It's just the putting it together, just really where the cost comes in.
Welcome back to the Manufacturing Come Up. I'm your host, Malachi Greb, and I have a special guest today, one who's purifying our air, Peter Mann. How's it going, Peter?
It's going great. How are you, Malachi?
Doing well, doing well. I think it's pretty interesting that you're in the air purification business. I'm fairly big on health. I took a deep dive. I mean, some like 5 8 years ago, and was like researching a lot on like health and water, or not health, but air and water, and how to improve some of those things in a household. So uh, I think it's pretty cool that you're out here purifying our air.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's really, I guess ever since COVID, it's gotten a lot more attention than
Yeah.
previously, obviously, with a virus in the air. But yeah, I think there's a lot of research underway, and I think it's going to definitely get more attention and awareness, which is going to directly lead to better health outcomes for folks.
What got you into air purification?
Yeah, I got interested. Gosh, this was like almost 20 years ago. So my son was an infant and had asthma and was going through asthma attacks and um, really struggling with that. And allergies were one of the triggers for him. And so I started to start to research it and figure out like how can we make his life better. And I've just kind of stuck with it. Just kind of been more or less a personal mission to try and help people's lives, and kind of what you breathe in the air is really not that much different than like drinking or eating. The quality of the food that you're putting into your body. So
Right.
and for him, as an infant, just watching him struggle and change color and have to deal with steroids and whatnot, it was rough. And so, I'm trying to look for a healthy way that, was not, to really minimize the drugs. That was the part that was, I didn't know anything about this before. I didn't know anything
Right.
about asthma or allergies, or because up to that point, I had not experienced any of it myself.
What so did you have any type of like engineering background or anything like that? What like kind of what led you into start taking this on? I mean, that took, that was the reason why, but what was kind of like some of the background to get you there?
Yeah. So I guess leading up to that, I'd worked for a couple tech companies. I worked for Tech Data in Florida, which is a large computer distributor, and I worked for Dell. And at Dell, I helped. It was really a marketing lead on the printer launch. I did some development functionality for Dell.com. And in the early 2000s is when the dot-com bubble burst. And so I had no business experience other than what I learned working for those companies. My background is really more math and industrial engineering. And yeah, and so when the dot-com bubble burst and we were doing round after round of layoffs at Dell, I'd met this friend. I was, living in Austin at the time, and we started an e-commerce business. And so I worked at Dell from 8 to 5, and then from 7 to 11 p.m. I was worked on this e-commerce business. And so it wasn't really so much the engineering experiences that I knew how databases work. I knew how to set up websites. I knew, and we were really just reselling other people's products. And back in the early 2000s, this is, before Facebook, before, and there was Google, and, it was 5 cents a click. And so it was super cheap to get traffic. And, I came from Dell where we were competing with HP and some other big companies. And now I'm in this internet competing with mom and pops selling tankless water heaters, or and so one of the categories was air purifiers that we sold. And I just got to learn the market. And then eventually, in 2009, I sold my half the business to my business partner to create a brand focused, entirely on indoor air quality. And
Mm.
it's kind of grown since then. I never would have imagined that we, now in 2023, moving into manufacturing ourselves in our facility.
Yeah.
Never would have predicted that back when this whole thing started.
How did the two things play a role with one another as far as like your personal mission and the e-commerce side of things, and how those kind of like merged together?
I mean, I think it was just a natural evolution, and I kind of really liked design. Um, my dad was a mechanical engineer, and we would just, he basically would just design everything, and we would just build it. So that was like my my background as a kid growing up, and I've always wanted to, really be efficient and, ideally make things ourselves. But to
Mhm.
make a motor and an air purifier and all that, I didn't really know where to begin. And so it was kind of stepped into it where initially it was, I worked with some folks and we designed the machine and then had it contract manufactured. And when COVID kind of blew up, I partnered with, or actually we merged with an electric motor company in Virginia in 2021, and that's how we ended up here, and we bought a 156,000 square foot manufacturing facility. So we got a lot of space, and and we have a ton of engineering talent in house. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to be able to take things from raw materials and components to being able to make the complete thing and deliver it straight to the end user.
How long have you guys been doing the manufacturing, or not necessarily doing the manufacturing, but how long have you guys actively been selling the product?
So, yeah, I've been since 2010 is really when we
2010.
started selling products, and we've probably brought 7 or 8 different products to market. I've worked with U.S. contract manufacturers and Chinese contract manufacturers, and they work very differently. And it's just really super excited about being able just to do it all ourselves. And the challenge I think for U.S. manufacturing is how are you cost competitive with these low cost imports. And so that's why it's taken us 2 or 3 years to get to the point where we're ready to start doing it ourselves, because it's taken a lot of effort to figure out how do you take labor out, which is really the variable in the manufacturing
Right.
side.
You've mentioned it, that really it goes into the design of the product. There's so much design that can go into the product that makes the manufacturing process just that much easier. And I think a lot of companies, they kind of miss that whenever it comes to like product design.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you can't take a product the way it's designed in China and then just make it that way here and expect to be competitive on price. You have to find like more efficient ways of doing it, and that's what we've done. And what we found is if you can take something, I don't know, from 20 parts down to 8 parts, I mean it's just so much simpler to put together. You reduce the number of screws, like everything adds up.
Yeah.
And what we've had to do, or what we've noticed, is when the Chinese within our category make products, they really minimize their upfront tooling costs, and so they do it as inexpensively as possible, which kind of leads you to create a lot of very simple parts. And then that puts a burden on the assembly side of it. And so what we were looking at is, well, let's make fewer parts, but they're obviously more complex parts, and they take longer to design and tool up, and the tooling's a little more intricate to
Yeah.
get that going. But once you have that, then your variable costs and your labor costs are really reduced, and that's, I think, one way that you can compete.
Absolutely. I don't like, with us being an automation company, not all the time just like throwing automation at something is the right thing to do. Sometimes it's like modifying the product, modifying the process. Like there's a lot of other ways to go about increasing your manufacturing throughput and efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really through automation and through efficiency is in it is
Yep.
I don't know how else to do it,
Yeah.
because component costs are really not that much different if you buy something here or source it in China. It's just the putting it together. It's
Parts
really where
expensive.
the
Yeah.
it's really where the cost comes in.
Right. Absolutely. Whenever you started your company, did it feel like a huge leap for you, or what was that transition like in your life?
No, I mean when I started the first business, I had the security blanket of Dell and a salary, So, and
Yeah.
I just put in the sweat equity to, build the other one, and it was actually only took 6 or 7 months of that to kind of get it to where it's like, yeah, this thing has legs, and I think I can leave Dell behind and jump into that with really minimizing the risk in
Right.
doing that, because there is, that was something I always worried about, is like, well, what am I going to do for income? Like, I just
Yeah.
start something new, and I've never done it before, and it was a way for me to test the waters, and really just minimize any kind of risk involved.
Yeah, and I think too, like you said, like just kind of jumping into a company and not doing something before, and like even though there's like this thing that you want to do, like having something behind you that has legs, like being able to build something out that shows like a little bit of proof and like mitigates that risk is like very very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some folks are, maybe just more willing to jump into it, but I was not wired that way to just
Right.
cut the cord and hope for the best. Yeah.
How long did you operate with that company?
So I did that for about 6 years, and then,
Cheers. Nice.
sold that, and then, started this business in 2009, or end of 2009. So yeah, this has been
Gotcha.
13, almost 14 years. Um, and it's
Mhm.
kind of I was talking with someone the other day, and it's like, you hear in the media about companies that just, in 2 years just blow up and become huge. But in my experience, most people, it's a long, slow, it's a long, slow
Yeah.
journey. And sometimes those rocket ships that take off kind of come down just as fast as they went up.
Yeah.
So, you got to build kind of
Yeah.
a foundation that
Mhm.
you can work off of. It's for every company, I think, that gets attention or raises a ton of money, there's probably 100 or 1,000 other ones that nobody's talking about.
Another thing that you don't see is like those companies that are super successful. A lot of times it is that 10 years of hard work, and then just so happens like these last 2 years, like they've really exploded because like all the hard work finally just started paying off, and they started really seeing the returns from everything.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly the case. It's just, but it's interesting how it's portrayed. Or, I think if you're an entrepreneur, or, starting off in a business, and that's kind of what you see, it's a bit of a distorted view on reality. And so I think it
Yeah.
helps to have some grounding in terms of, what's realistic, and, what success looks like, and understanding, like, what my experience, everything takes longer and costs more than than what you would
Yeah.
think.
When it came to starting the second business, was it like a pretty hard transition between you were done with that business and then you started this one, or was there like a like merge period where you were kind of doing both at the same time?
Um, no, that was it was kind of a clean cut, and then I took a short break, and then just jumped right into the new business. Yeah, and so, I was kind of, I'm kind of, wired to want to work. And so I was going crazy doing nothing. Some people can take breaks and check out, but I'm like, I need to be doing something. I just can't sit here idle.
Do you what through that period of time had you been doing like the education phase of like air purifiers, or where were you at in that phase?
So I mean, in the first business, I really learned the market really well. I understood,
Mhm.
what customers cared about. And when you started the new business, it was really more around just designing products for the
Around the
problems people have. It wasn't
yeah.
it's basically, you hear the same thing over and over again. And it's like, all right, we're just going to build it that way, build for what the customer wants, not necessarily what we think is um, something different. And now
Right.
it's really fascinating that with COVID, there's so many new brands and competitors in the space. It's really a different, the market's really changed. And so now we're, I think we're really in a good position with what we've done from a product development standpoint um, to really thrive in this environment, because it's oversaturated. There's too many.
Yeah.
It's like you've doubled the brands, and then the market's the same size. It kind of creates a lot of,
Right.
yeah.
I think it's extremely important that you mentioned through your other business that you was able to like kind of understand the market of it.
Mhm.
'Cause I think that's a huge part. Like like say for instance for myself, it was a pretty hard transition for me doing like engineering and project management to operating a company. I also did like a lot of just research and knowledge building of like how to or how to scale a business. So like I had a lot of knowledge of like how to scale a business, how to like retain employees. Really, a lot of the knowledge was on like operating a bigger company. Maybe
Mhm.
like 50 plus employees or something like that, right? And so I had a lot of like education that I taught myself on those type of things. Came from an engineering background, project management background, and then transitioned to operating a company with like 0 employees, then 1 employees, then 2 employees, and um, there's like definitely a phase that could have helped like if I was operating some smaller company. Given I operated in a smaller company, so like I was able to kind of see the inner workings of some of those things, but I also wasn't operating like the business side of things. So just like being able to like have some type of experience that like builds like fundamental knowledges, like you said, you knew the market, you knew what the customers really liked and disliked about the product, and so like that gave you like a good like point of view and measurement, and like I haven't done a lot of e-commerce myself, but I understand how it works, and like you're able to test a lot of things through that. Like, does this image work? Does that image not work? Does this title work better? Does like, and so like going through and being able to test all these different things, you kind of like you learn some type of like business aspect or marketing aspect that maybe you can't really catch without just kind of doing and experiencing the thing.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it helps if you don't have that experience. Ideally, find someone that does. What I've seen with engineers or engineering is design and marketing are like different worlds, and it's kind of like if you grew up in the engineering world and you're always just trying to make something work better or be more efficient. There's other folks that look at it from a design, aesthetics, usability, what the customer cares about, user experience, that is not necessarily inherent within some engineering development and processes. And so it's been kind of fascinating for me since we merged our companies together with a largely engineering B2B focus with a business that's consumer direct to consumer focus, which is it's like things that are obvious in a direct to consumer business are not obvious to the engineers that have not worked with consumers. It's really
Right.
been kind of fascinating, and there's points of um, I don't know if conflict is the right word, but if you've ever designed a product and you have engineers and then you have the industrial designers that are making it look good or the user interface work a certain way, and then that creates conflict with the end. It's always those touch points, which is kind of where the rubber meets the road as to like which way you go with it, because you could
Yeah.
perfectly engineer something, but that doesn't mean someone's going to want to buy that, right? It has to, like, do I even want to put this in my room? Is this something I want to show off? Is this something that
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about or get excited about emotionally? And that's
Mm.
very distant from the engineering. So for me, it's really interesting to see all the different pieces. And I would say, um, if you're an engineering person and you're looking to, get into entrepreneurship or sell things, especially if it's to a consumer base, is to really understand, the consumer's needs and the marketplace, and it's like you don't know what you don't know. If you've been kind of in one specific area, and the same thing on the marketing industrial design standpoint is you don't understand engineering. And so it's really about
Yeah.
getting all sides on the same page. And there are certain points where you have to compromise, I think, in terms of,
Yeah.
especially if you're developing a product, is like, if there's points where it's like, well, this would be perfect from a design standpoint, but it creates problems on the engineering standpoint, or they call it in tooling like the A side and the B side, and it's like, one of them, can't override so much the other one that it creates a problem in, the other side. So it's
Right.
And I think the first step is just having awareness of that, of your blind
Yeah.
spots, because everyone does. You don't, I think if you come from the engineering world and you've not been exposed to it, it's just this weird world that you're not going to understand, or some of it's a bit art versus science, and you can't necessarily tie spend to a specific result, and that just becomes, from an engineering standpoint, like it doesn't compute. It's
Yeah, I think like one thing is like, so say for instance like with the our type of work, it's a lot of engineers, but you know we may be selling a project to a project manager, plant manager, or something like that, but for future success, really the system needs to be very operator friendly. The operator is the one that's going to really deal with it in the long term, and the easier they can get a system up and running, and the better their experience is with it, that's going to be a better uh, it's just gonna be a better selling point,
yeah,
right? Because that's gonna live on for years versus an operator saying, "Oh, I'm always struggling with this system. It's always down." And a lot of that stuff is operator interface. You can design like one of the best systems, but if it's extremely complex for the operator to use it, then it's gonna get kind of a bad rap over some time. So it's like extremely important to adapt to whoever that end user is, and just make sure the product fits them and is exactly what they're looking for and need.
yeah, because otherwise, like, how are you going to sell these things, like, if nobody wants to use it, or if it doesn't,
Yeah.
and the more problems you can solve, or the easier you can make someone's life, the easier it is to sell these things and get them to talk about it, and other people would buy it. So it's kind of, um, it's really just solving problems, I think, and part of it obviously is just really being connected with whoever the customer and end user are, the whatever you're making.
Right, absolutely. I'm gonna do a little bit of a shift. I know one of our earlier emails with one another, or you with our team, um, was regarding Autism Awareness Month. I just wanted to see if you wanted to dive into that any.
Sure. Yeah, I guess April is Autism Awareness Month. Some people say Autism Acceptance Month. I'm not sure. But I kind of, yeah, I see both sides of it. Like, so I was late diagnosed autistic. I think, if you grew up before the 2000s and you're an adult, you're most likely, and you're autistic, you're most likely late diagnosed, just because they weren't diagnosing many people before the 2000s. It just, unless you were very high support needs. And so, I've kind of, I kind of lived my life and didn't realize I was autistic until I saw, or my wife saw, like a CBS morning show, and they profiled an autistic woman, and she described her traits, and she's like, "Oh, you need to see this." And so I watched it, and I'm like, "Oh, that's me." And so, yeah, and so, I've kind of, and it's like every couple of years the stats come out where they keep diagnosing higher and higher percentages of kids with, as being autistic. And what's kind of fascinating to me is there's so many adults that are out there that are autistic that have no idea. If it's like 2.5% of the population, like in the 70s, when I was in elementary school, it was like 1 in 2,500 were diagnosed, and then in 2000 it was like 1 in 150, and then this week they came out and said it's 1 in 36. And so it's like, to go from 1 in 2,500 to 1 in 36 is it's like so that means, and it's not like that there's more people that are autistic. It's the diagnostics have changed, the awareness of like medical professionals and looking at kids has brought into where they're like, oh no, that's not this, they're just autistic. And because people have been diagnosed with other things and given medication for things they don't have, because it was just, I think we think we're so advanced sometimes, and when you look at the brain, or you look at understanding for these kinds of things, it's like, it seems like we're still in the early days, if if the percentages are changing that much. And I think when you're and I just mention it because there, I don't know how many. I would say probably half the adults that are autistic are have not even been diagnosed. So there's all these people living their lives unaware, and it's like, for me, finding out is kind of life changing, because it's like, oh, that explains so much, and you kind of don't feel pressure to act a certain way, or just be yourself.
I'd say if you don't, what are some of like the key indicators?
So for me, it's a hyper focus is a trait. Like, they call it. There's a term called monotropism. You can Google it. It's called a flow state, where you can get really focused in on something, and I can
Yeah,
block everything off that's going around me, and just be so like in my head on something. And there's all these like positive chemicals that are that you get from that. And it's not great if somebody's there with you trying to say something and you don't hear what they say. So
yeah,
in a personal relationship, it can be problematic sometimes. But it's really having hyper focus. It's usually having certain routines that you do, and that's really
mhm,
just to manage anxiety, is a lot of what that's about.
gotcha.
um, and sensory sensitivity is another one that's kind of not well understood, but it's pretty common amongst autistics, where things that the typical person finds annoying, the an autistic person can find disabling. And so, for
Mhm,
example, any of the senses, but for me, it's sound, which I think is the most common one. Like, if you go to a restaurant and it's loud, people just talk louder, right? And for
yeah,
me, it's like I can hear every conversation and they're amplified to the point where
mhm,
it's like Charlie Brown's teacher talking on a turn the volume up, and I
yeah,
hear little bits of all the conversations and none of the conversations. And then it just
gotcha.
kind of goes to a shutdown, where it's like I can't even function in this environment. And then they're like, what's wrong with you? You're not joining in. It's like, I don't know how to. It's like it's not working.
Right.
And so that's something that is pretty common among autistics, that I think it's just a level of intensity where I talk to other people and they're like, oh yeah, nobody likes that. We just talk louder, and it's like, that works for you, but like I can't. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, if I can't hear what's going on, and it just the noise is just you know
yeah,
overwhelming. And so,
yeah.
but that's really, autism is really just a difference in how your brain's wired. So it's a different way of thinking and perceiving and socializing. And that's basically it for autism. And then there's co-occurring conditions which may or may not be present. And that could be, cognition, could be speech, could be ADHD, could be a whole bunch of other things.
Is like OCD fall in that too,
Yeah.
or
hmm It's like a huge umbrella of other things. And so typically when someone thinks of like autism, they think of like the most highest support needs, which is someone that can't
mhm.
talk and, very low IQ. And that's not part of the diagnostics for
It,
autism.
autism's, if I'm not mistaken, isn't it the one where like some people like have like extremely high like math capabilities?
Yeah, you can have that. Like for me, I get dopamine from work. That's how I could work at Dell 8 to 5 and then do the other job 7 to 11, because I could really sit and focus and just crank out the work,
Mhm,
and I loved it. I would rather do that
yeah,
than go to a party, um,
right.
just which is not normal. But allows me to play to my strengths, and it's really been helpful for me from a business standpoint, to be able to do that. To me, it's not work. I mean, Elon Musk talks about working, I don't know, 80 to 100 hours a week. But if
Yeah,
if 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 you're a social extrovert and you get energy from social conversations, well, for someone that's wired this way, that's what you get from work. It's
right.
like to work 80 to 100 hours a week is like, why would you not work 80 to 100 hours a week if
Yeah,
that's where you get your energy from? It's just, and
yeah,
it's really, it's been stigmatized, and I think it's just because of a lack of awareness. And it's not, um, that I think autistic people are deficient or defective. It's just we're just different. And so it's
yeah.
kind of like being left-handed versus right-handed. It's just born that way, and it's
Mhm,
just your brain works in a different way. And I think the more society becomes aware of that, the stigma should drop, and it's
Yeah.
not something that's a negative. And so yeah, so but I've really not known for a little over a year and a half, that I'm even autistic, and now I see that my dad was
Well,
autistic too.
really.
Yeah, it's like, huh. Yeah, so you have all these generations of people that were just never diagnosed because, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I almost feel like there's some version of myself that's like either autistic or OCD, just because like I feel like my mind just doesn't think in the same way that other people
Hmm.
think. Like I don't know. I mean, some of the things maybe like just business minded, but like I'll do some weird things where it's like, I make my coffee and like I literally like rearrange in the order of like how I do things. Like I pull out the tray, I put the filter in, I grab the coffee, and I'm like, okay, do I put my ice in my cup? So I drink my iced black coffee every
Yeah,
day. I'm like, do I put my ice in my cup first? Or do I put my ice in my cup last? Do I hit the buttons on the machine first? You know what I mean? So like every day I kind of like almost iterate like what I'm doing in my coffee making
right.
process. But there's like a ton of different things throughout the day that I just do. Like if it's a repetitive
Hmm.
task, I like in my head I'll analyze like how do I do this quicker? And it's
Yeah,
like,
that's very,
shut up,
yeah,
wait.
that's very kind of autistic. Like, yeah, and the routines and the structure for that is really, it's really about managing anxiety. And it's like if you do it the same way, it just becomes comfortable. Like, there's this other thing, they call it sameness, where we tend to eat the same foods over and over and over again. And it's not that we don't like other foods, it's just it feels more natural, yeah, and easier just to eat the same thing. I was like, yeah, I eat peanut butter and jelly K through 12. So
Do you feel like with being autistic, there's been like certain things that have like kind of helped you with business?
yeah, I mean, being able to focus is a huge one. And I think it's also like Steve Jobs, they're saying was autistic as well. And he had a saying, the best ideas should win. And I think, when you're autistic, you tend to, not be as focused on the hierarchy of like who's the most senior person in the room. You don't have as much of a need to fit in. It's like, yeah, just the best ideas should win. Doesn't matter who it comes from. I mean, I think it just
Yeah.
makes for better organization. If you're
Mhm.
not, if people are free to speak up, and if the senior person has like an idea that's not great, you just like, all right, just move on. We're not gonna
Yeah.
do that. But um, when I've worked for the larger companies, it was, a bit that it was like people didn't even chime in because you're two steps below
Sure.
somebody else at the table, and you're not going to even speak up. And so I think
Yeah.
being autistic is, it's being more open to different ideas, and it's whoever has the best idea, let's just go with that. It just doesn't matter.
I understand. I mean, I don't know if I am or am not autistic, but I definitely feel like I understand exactly what you're saying. Like, there's like this way of like thinking about things like differently. Of like, whereas a lot of people will be like, this is the way it should be
Hmm.
done. Whereas like, it's more of like a why. Like it's just like a
Yeah.
constant like,
Yeah, it's like this is the way we've always done things, is like that's not enough. It's like, how can we
yeah,
make it better? Like it's always
yeah,
like in a state of constant, continuous improvement. And
mhm,
I think with most things, especially if it's process related, it's you're never finished. It can always get, even like designing a website, it can always get better. It's Or your
yeah.
product can get better. um, and it's Yeah, I mean, there's a number of online assessments that, if you're, ever curious kind of where you fall on the scale, it kind of, there's one, it's interesting. It's this guy Simon Baron Cohen. I think he's cousins with Sasha Baron Cohen. It's kind of funny, but he's like a Cambridge professor that's a leader in autistic research, and he has like a 50 question, um, um, test, I
A
guess, or
quiz
quiz,
thing.
yeah, that you can take and kind of see kind of where you score, because everyone, the typical person scores like 16 or 17 out of 50, and autistic people tend to score 30 and above. And when I
Mm.
took it, I scored a 43. I was like, oh.
Yeah,
But yeah, so
well,
there's, yeah, it's kind of, in a matter of a few minutes, you can, take some of those screening tools, I guess they're called, and really get a
Mhm.
sense for kind of where you are. But I think um, if you look at the professions that are autistic, it's really doctors and engineers, or the typical communities where you find autistic people, and computer programmers.
Yeah, I feel like that type of mind is like very like analyzation type of mind.
Yeah, very logical.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but
Yep. What's the so kind of change topics completely, but uh, you're starting to reshore and starting to do some of your manufacturing here in the U.S.
yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah, we're starting this summer, June, July timeframe is what we're targeting. And so we have a new electric motor technology that we're, launching along with it, which is the engine for the air purifier. And super excited about doing that because, we have really better performance and lower price than the Chinese imports. And so I think that's I'm more of a marketing guy standpoint. It's like that's a really easy message to sell. And then with this motor platform, we can really theoretically make anything with an electric motor. And so now we're really just trying to get this going, and get all the quality in place, and ramp up. And then once we're in high volume production, kind of figure out what we want to be when we grow up, and see what else we want to make, because we've got tool room, machine shop, um, assembly, all the shipping and warehousing. So it's kind of a one-stop shop. um, we don't do the injection molding here. We get a local company does that, um, but we handle a lot of it. And so I'm really excited with kind of what we've been building. It's been 2-3 years of hard work finally coming together.
what is your projection as far as like products? How many products do you have? Any like a goal of like how many products or like a certain like type or category of product?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're starting with just air moving products and fans. So it's air purifiers, and then there's some other like HVAC type products, like ventilation
Mm,
type products, just to stay within a family. But I see maybe later next year, the year after, branching out into some other categories. One of our competitors is Dyson, and you can kind of see what they make, and so not really sure where we're going to go. It's also interesting that we've had some companies reach out to us just because um, there's this move recently and wanting to move manufacturing away from China, but people don't know how to do it. And so, so potentially we would contract manufacture for some other folks, but we'll see how that plays out. I'm not really sure where that's going to go, but it's definitely a capability that we have. And so I think that could be another aspect of our business for next year.
I might have to check out one of your air
All right.
purifiers.
Yeah, for sure. Be up this summer.
What are some other valuable tips that you have to add to the community, helping them through their career?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, um, you know, you don't have to crush it in year one. I think it's like if you think about it when you go to work, it's given how long we live, and it could easily be a 50-year plus career. And so you just kind of map out like what your goals are, and then work backwards from there. And very few people crush it first year or two. And so kind of set realistic objectives, and make sure you have enough finances to support kind of what you're doing, and make sure it's realistic, and focus on the customer is kind of the highlights that I would say.
I mean, also too is like kind of like to stem off that a little bit. Like if there's a dream and a vision of something that you're wanting to accomplish, and you see like it's so far out to make money off of it, like try to be able to support you financially. Find some other thing around that that is easier to be able to start making money from it. That way, if you are, if you are trying to like start your own business, or try to come up with some product, that you're able to start gaining some experience in that ecosystem. Like I think it's very very cool that you mentioned like you did e-commerce and you were selling your air purifiers there. Like that probably had to have like some significant value add to like your mentality to like the systems itself, and also just marketing too. You had marketing experience, so now it's like now you have like the ability to market a product, but you would have never like had those type of things. You never had like the ability to like sell that product and promote that product if you hadn't have had those other experiences first that were in the ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely. I had a lot of on the job learning, and so I think, if you think about it, if you're going to work for 50 years, you could work for a company and get the experience and understand, um, how things work, before venturing off on your own. But I would also say, I think there's so much opportunity right now. If you went back to pre 2000, there weren't very many people going off starting their own business. It's the internet's really changed things and opened it up
Yeah.
to so many folks for opportunities that didn't exist for generations before. So I just
Mhm.
feel like super lucky to be, kind of alive and working at this time,
Yep.
because if you look at previous generations, like they didn't have those opportunities and they were stuck working
Mhm.
at other companies. And there's nothing wrong with working at a company, but if you have dreams of going off and you know doing, more entrepreneurial type activities, um, there's just, there's so many opportunities and things are changing. Like with AI, I don't know what's going to happen with that. It's a
Yeah.
whole nother,
Yep.
that's it's just, it's a real game changer. And the whole, like, climate change, and there's certain things there with a ton of money going into chips, and who knows what's going to, kind of fall out from that. But things are changing, and whenever there's change, there's opportunity. And so I think it's really
Yep.
understanding the market and figuring out where you fit in.
I think definitely paying attention to AI space is like extremely important. It's one of those things that could definitely disrupt us. If you think about technology wise, like my stage and age in life, like we didn't even really hit like a high level of technology until like 20 25 years ago or something like that. Like that's just when I mean, I grew up with the box TV and the turn dials on it
Yeah,
still. So
the
like
pliers.
that was the level of technology. Yeah. If that was the level of technology then, it's like now people are being born with smartphones in their hands. Like no telling what the future increases of technologies are going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I was watching a TV show, Fargo, I guess, and they were making phone calls, and you have to go to a phone booth and put a quarter in to call someone. So I
Yeah,
mean, things have changed fast, and yeah, I think it's an exciting time. I think these are kind of early days still, and so, I think it's being patient and being aware for what your talents and skills are, and do really, ideally, do what you like to do. Because, yeah, I guess another Steve Jobs quote was why they kept sticking with it, and he goes, well, a normal, a rational person wouldn't stick with it. It's like the crazy ones are the ones, like, you have to, like, really want it, because it's a competitive world. um and you have to put in the effort for sure. But
yep,
yeah, but it's, for me, it's
absolutely.
fun. But there definitely are days that are stressful. To be honest, it's not all, it's not all roses, every day. So
Yeah, definitely a good point of advice. Anybody who's going to start a company, learn how to deal with stress. That's been like a big one. Is like that for me, and I really even like the past couple months, I've like done better than ever with like some situation of like this is not going smoothly. We have to solve X problem, and like before it was like, oh my gosh, like I'm just thinking of immediate like just tense stress, and now I'm just like more like okay, all right, we'll figure it out. You know, it's because like when it comes to business, especially the more and more you grow and the faster you try to grow, like things are just gonna come. Like it's just inevitable that more bad things, not more good things come too,
Mhm.
right? But there also will be more bad things as well, just because you're doing more things, right? Like
Yeah, and I don't know if you're familiar with Seth Godin, but he's a marketing like thought leader, and he did a keynote one time, and he was saying a lot of the problems we have are really not that difficult to solve. We just don't want to solve them. And they did this experiment where like you wrote down your biggest problem on a piece of paper and then handed it to the stranger sitting next to you, and it's like, oh, that person can tell you what you need to do, but you yourself don't want to do what you need to do to solve the problem.
Mm,
It's like, I'm like,
yeah,
wow. So, when I think about when we have a problem, it's like, well, if I handed someone this description of the problem that I didn't know that would objectively evaluate it,
mm,
the solutions
yeah,
are really not that complicated a lot of times. It's just, I don't know if it's a bit of cognitive dissonance or like we're just not wanting to
yeah,
do.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's like, yeah, you get blinded from the stress, and you're like, can get caught up in ignoring a situation. I definitely feel like the best, like whenever there are those things that I don't want to handle, and I go in, I handle them, like
Yeah.
especially if I let a few of them build up, or I was just busy or something like
Yeah.
that. Then I knock out like three of them in one day, and I'm just like, ah. Peter, where can people find you
Yeah,
at?
I would say on LinkedIn, Peter Mann, Mann. I think I come up in the search results. So yeah, happy to chat with anyone around manufacturing or even autism. Um, yep, just leave it at
Absolutely.
that.
Okay, good deal. Well, thank you very much for being on today, Peter. Definitely an enjoyable
Yep,
conversation.
thanks, Malachi. Enjoyed it.
Thank you. You have a
You
good
too.
one.